"Save us," she cried. The cowboy saved them, then asked for a promise she dreaded. The afternoon had started like any other in the quiet town that lay between the wide golden fields and the gentle hills. The sun had been bright and warm in the morning, shining through the windows of small houses and falling on the dirt roads where children played and neighbors walked to greet each other. But as the day grew older, there was a change in the air that people could feel, even if they could not see it yet. The wind, which had been light and soft, began to carry a chill, moving in sudden gusts that rustled the leaves and made the branches of the old oak trees sway more than usual. Birds that had been singing quietly in the trees stopped and disappeared into the higher branches, their small shadows flitting across the ground. There was a quiet warning in the way the world seemed to hold its breath. Elena was driving her small silver car along the narrow country road. She had spent the afternoon visiting her sister in the neighboring town, and now she was heading home, her 2 young children asleep in the back seat. The children had been excited that morning, talking and laughing as she got them ready for the trip. But the long ride had made them tired, and now they were quiet, the only sound in the car being the soft hum of the engine and the occasional patter of raindrops on the windshield. Elena enjoyed these quiet moments. The way the road curved gently between the fields, the way the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the hills. But today there was something different about the clouds gathering in the distance. They were not the usual fluffy white clouds she saw on sunny days. These clouds were thick and dark, stretching across the horizon like a heavy blanket. At first she thought it might just be the evening settling in, but the clouds moved faster than the sun, and their gray turned almost black as they rolled closer. The air smelled different, too. Heavier, wetter, like it had swallowed the scent of the earth and the grass and pressed it down toward the road. As she drove, Elena felt a small unease in her stomach. She glanced at the rear-view mirror and saw the children stirring slightly in their seats, their little faces frowning in sleep. She reached back and gently brushed her hand over her youngest daughter's hair, whispering softly to calm her without waking her fully. She reminded herself that the storm might not even reach them. After all, storms passed quickly in this part of the country, and she had driven through many before without trouble, but the uneasy feeling stayed. Then, without warning, the first drops of rain fell. They were small at first, almost gentle, tapping lightly on the windshield. Elena turned on the wipers, thinking it would pass, but the drops quickly grew heavier, becoming larger and faster, pounding against the car with a force that startled her. The road became slippery almost immediately, the rain turning the dirt and dust into a slick, muddy surface. Her tires skidded slightly as she tried to slow down, and her heart beat faster. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, careful not to make sudden movements. The storm did not stay small for long. The sky darkened further, and the wind picked up, blowing against the car so strongly that Elena had to lean forward slightly to keep control. Lightning split the sky in bright flashes, and thunder followed almost instantly, shaking the air and making her children wake fully. They began to cry, scared by the sudden noise and the storm's ferocity. Elena tried to calm them, speaking in soft, soothing tones, but her own voice trembled with the tension she felt. She reached for the radio, hoping to catch a weather alert, but the signal was weak and static-filled, cutting off every few seconds. The road became harder to navigate with every passing moment. Rainwater flowed across the surface in small streams that grew quickly, filling the dips in the road and covering the shallow ditches that lined the sides. Elena knew she had to slow down even more, but the mud made her tires slip, and she struggled to keep the car moving straight. Her hands gripped the wheel tightly, and she focused on the road ahead, but her eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror and the side windows, watching the water rise along the edges. Suddenly, without any warning, her car slid sideways. The tires lost traction completely, and in a few terrifying seconds, the car skidded off the narrow road and came to a stop in a shallow ditch near the edge of a small creek. The water from the creek, already rising from the heavy rain, was now rushing closer to the car with a soft but steady roar. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she realized how dangerous the situation had become. She tried to restart the car, but the engine sputtered and failed. Panic began to creep in. She looked at the children, now fully awake and crying loudly, their small hands reaching for her. She tried to calm them, wrapping her arms around them and whispering that everything would be fine. But deep down, she knew that the situation was serious. The water was rising faster than she had imagined, and the ditch she had landed in was low and narrow. If the creek overflowed, the car could be swept away. She had to get help. Elena stepped out of the car, careful to hold on to her children, and felt the cold water and mud around her ankles. The wind blew rain into her face, soaking her clothes and making it difficult to see. She called out, her voice trembling, "Help! Please! Someone help us!" But the wind carried her cries away, scattering them across the fields. There were no houses nearby, no lights, no sign of anyone who could hear her. She ran back and forth along the ditch, looking for anything that might help. A passerby, another car, even a tree to cling to if the water rose higher. The children clung to her, shivering and crying, their small voices adding to the chaos of the storm. She shouted again, louder this time, her voice breaking with desperation. "Somebody, please, save us!" The words were swallowed by the storm, carried away by the wind and rain. Far in the distance, over the hills and fields, a lone figure appeared on horseback. Caleb, a cowboy who had spent the afternoon checking on his cattle before the storm became too strong, was making his way back to his ranch. He had noticed the dark clouds gathering and felt the need to hurry. The storm had caught him off guard, and he pushed his horse faster, hoping to reach shelter before the rain fell too heavily. Then he heard it, a faint cry carried by the wind. At first he thought he might be imagining it, a trick of the storm playing with his ears. But he heard it again, clear and desperate. "Help! Save us!" His heart skipped a beat. He knew the cry of a woman in danger, and something in him stirred, a sense of urgency he could not ignore. Without thinking twice, he turned his horse toward the sound, galloping across the wet fields, the rain pelting him and his horse, mud flying up from the ground with every step. As he approached, he saw the car in the ditch, surrounded by rising water. The situation was worse than he had imagined. The water from the creek was moving quickly, and the mother was trying to hold her children above it as she stepped cautiously through the mud. Caleb knew there was no time to waste. He guided his horse to a safe spot and secured it to a nearby fence post, then waded into the cold, rushing water. The storm did not slow him down. Instead, it pushed him forward, giving him the strength of purpose that only urgency could bring. Elena saw him coming and felt a surge of hope. The children clung to her tightly, their cries softening as they recognized that help had arrived. Caleb reached them quickly, speaking in firm, calm tones to reassure both the mother and the children. He lifted the youngest child into his arms, holding them above the water, careful not to let the current sweep them away. Then he returned for the older child, guiding both safely back to the bank. Finally, he helped Elena out of the water, steadying her as she stumbled on the slippery ground. They stood together on higher ground, soaked and exhausted, but safe. The storm continued around them, lightning flashing across the dark sky, thunder rolling in the distance, and rain pouring down without mercy. But for the moment, they were safe. Elena clutched her children, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. Caleb could feel the wind pushing against him as he waded deeper into the water. Each step was a struggle, The muddy ground shifted beneath his feet, threatening to throw him off balance. The rain poured down relentlessly, soaking his clothes and plastering his hair to his forehead. The creek water was cold, colder than he had expected, sending sharp shivers through his body. But he did not hesitate. He had heard the desperate cries of the mother, and the thought of the children trapped in the rising water filled him with determination. He knew he had to act quickly, or the storm might take away their safety in moments. Elena's heart raced as she saw him coming closer. She clutched her children tightly, feeling the icy water lap against her legs. The youngest, a little girl with soft brown hair, began to whimper and shiver. Her older brother, only a few years older, looked frightened but tried to hold himself together. Elena spoke softly to them, whispering words of comfort, but her own voice trembled. She had faced storms before, but this one felt different, stronger, faster, more dangerous. The sound of the water rushing over rocks and along the banks filled her ears, drowning out almost everything else. Caleb reached the car, the water now swirling around his knees. He knelt down beside it, steadying himself against the muddy edge, and spoke in a firm but gentle voice. "I'm here to help. We're going to get out of this safely." His eyes met Elena's, and she could see the calm determination in his gaze. It gave her a small measure of hope, but fear still gripped her chest. He first reached for the youngest child. The little girl had stopped crying for a moment, her wide eyes staring at him with both fear and curiosity. Caleb lifted her carefully, supporting her small body with both arms, holding her high above the cold water. He spoke softly, almost like he was telling a story, to keep her calm. "You're safe now," he said. "I've got you. Just hold on." The girl clung to him instinctively, trusting the stranger with her life. As he began the slow walk back toward the bank, the water pushed against him like a living force. He had to plant his feet firmly in the slippery mud and lean into the current to keep from falling. The rain pelted his face and soaked his clothes, but he barely noticed. All that mattered was getting the child to safety. Each step seemed longer than the last, each movement heavier than usual, but Caleb never wavered. When he reached the shore, he handed the child gently to Elena, who hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. The girl clung to her mother, frightened but safe. Caleb did not rest. He turned immediately and waded back into the water for the older child. This time the boy tried to resist at first, frightened by the water and the strange man. But Caleb spoke in a calm, steady voice, reassuring him. "It's okay. We'll be out of here soon. Just hold on to me." Slowly the boy allowed Caleb to lift him, gripping his arms and shoulders. The storm seemed to intensify with every passing moment. Thunder shook the air and lightning split the sky in brilliant flashes. Rain lashed down in sheets, making visibility almost impossible. Water flowed more quickly over the rocks and mud, creating small whirlpools and pulling at Caleb's legs. Yet, he pushed forward, focusing only on the children. Each step was carefully measured, each motion deliberate, as he navigated the treacherous terrain. Back on the bank, Elena helped her youngest child regain her footing while comforting the older boy. She looked at Caleb, her chest heaving from the adrenaline and relief, and whispered, "Thank you so much. You saved them." Her words were filled with emotion, but Caleb shook his head. "We're not done yet," he said. His eyes were still on the water, scanning for any danger. He knew that if he did not help Elena out of the water, they all could still be in danger. Turning back toward her, he extended a hand. "Take my hand. I'll help you," he said. Elena hesitated for a moment, fear holding her back. The muddy water was deep, cold, and unpredictable. But she knew she had no choice. She placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and steadiness there. Caleb pulled her gently, guiding her through the water and mud, keeping her balanced. Each step was slow and careful, and the storm's fury seemed to press closer with every movement. As they reached slightly higher ground, the water at last became shallower and the mud less slippery. Elena stumbled slightly, but Caleb caught her and steadied her. The children clung to their mother, still crying softly, their small bodies trembling from the cold and fear. For the first time since the storm began, they all felt a small sense of relief. Elena looked at Caleb, her eyes wide with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You saved us. You risked yourself for us." Caleb shook his head, brushing water and mud from his clothes. "I couldn't just leave you there. Anyone in that situation would hope someone would help them." His voice was calm, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes, the kind of intensity that comes from someone who has faced danger before and knows how fragile life can be. The storm raged around them, but in that small patch of safety, a fragile calm settled. The children, still trembling, began to relax a little as they huddled closer to their mother. Elena held them tightly, feeling their small bodies shivering against her, and whispered comforting words. "It's okay," she said. "We're safe now. Everything's going to be okay." Caleb took a moment to look at the car. It was half submerged now, water swirling around it, and he knew it would be swept away if the rain continued. The thought made his heart tighten, but he did not dwell on it. His focus remained on Elena and her children. Life, he knew, was more important than things. The car could be replaced. People could not. The storm continued to roar, rain lashing down, thunder echoing in the distance. Lightning lit up the sky in brilliant, jagged flashes, momentarily revealing the dark shapes of trees and the wide, empty fields. Caleb's horse, tied to the fence nearby, stamped its hooves nervously, sensing the storm and the water. He glanced toward it and felt a moment of relief, knowing it was safe. Then he turned back to the family, making sure they were all together and unharmed. Elena, catching her breath, looked at Caleb again. Her voice shook as she spoke. You're a hero. I don't know how you did it." Caleb smiled faintly, though there was no pride in it. "I just did what I could. That's all anyone can do." He did not mention the fear he had felt as he stepped into the rushing water, nor the adrenaline that had driven him forward. He wanted her to focus on the safety of her children, not on him. After a few moments, Elena spoke again, softer this time. I thought we were going to die. The water, it was so fast, and I didn't know what to do." She hugged her children closer. Caleb nodded understandingly. He had seen fear like this many times before, though not always in a storm. Fear was natural, he knew, but so was hope. And hope was what had carried them through. For a long moment, they stood there together, listening to the rain and thunder, letting themselves catch their breath. The children began to calm down, their cries fading into soft sniffles. Elena wiped her eyes and looked at Caleb. "I don't even know your name," she said. "How can I ever thank you?" Caleb shrugged slightly, not wanting attention. "Just stay safe. That's enough for me." But then he paused. His expression changed slightly, becoming more serious. He knew that this was not just about saving people from a storm. There were lessons to be learned, promises to be made, responsibilities to carry forward. He had seen too much in his life to ignore that. He looked at Elena, and for the first time he spoke words that would change everything for her. "I want you to make a promise," he said quietly. Elena frowned slightly, confusion and curiosity mingling in her eyes. She did not know what he meant. A promise? After everything, she thought, she just wanted to rest, to hold her children, to be safe. But Caleb's tone was firm, and she sensed the weight behind it. "You've seen how quickly things can go wrong," he continued. "I've lost people before, people I loved, because no one acted in time. I don't want that to happen again, not to anyone else. Promise me that if you ever see someone in danger, you will act, no matter how difficult it seems, no matter how inconvenient. You will do what you can to help." Elena's chest tightened. She had not expected this. A simple thank you would have been enough, but now he was asking for something much more, something lifelong. She hesitated, the storm still raging around them, unsure if she could promise such a thing. But she looked at her children safe in her arms and then at Caleb, who had risked himself to save them, and she knew she could not refuse. "I promise," she said softly. Caleb nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "Good. That promise, it matters more than anything else today." For a moment they stood there, listening to the storm, letting the significance of that moment sink in. The danger had passed, but the lesson remained, and though they did not know it yet, the promise Elena had made would shape the rest of her life. After the storm had passed and the rain had lessened to a gentle drizzle, the air felt heavy but fresh. The sky was still gray, and small puddles reflected the fading light like tiny mirrors scattered across the fields. Elena sat on the damp grass, her children beside her, wrapped in a thin blanket she had pulled from the back seat of the car. They were safe, alive, and for the first time since the storm began, a quiet relief settled over them. Yet even in that relief, Elena felt a lingering tension, a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude that made her chest feel tight. Caleb stood nearby, watching them. His clothes were still soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, and the mud from the ditch clung stubbornly to his boots and pants. He had helped them out of immediate danger, but he knew his job was not yet done. There was more to this day than just the rescue. He could see it in Elena's eyes, the mixture of fear, awe, and curiosity. And he knew the moment had come to speak about the promise he had asked for, the promise that weighed heavily on his heart. Elena's children, still trembling slightly, leaned against her as she tried to calm them. She spoke softly, her voice almost a whisper, trying to soothe their fears. "It's okay, it's okay. We're safe now. We're going to be okay." Her eyes were wet with tears, not just from relief, but from a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude toward Caleb. She had seen too much of the storm's power, and she knew how close they had come to real danger. Without Caleb, they might not have survived. Caleb approached her slowly, his expression calm but serious. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath as if gathering the right words, the ones that would make her understand the weight behind his request. The children, sensing that something was happening, quieted down and looked at him with wide eyes. He knelt slightly to be at their level, not wanting to appear intimidating, and then he spoke. "Today I saved you and your children," he began softly. "But I need you to understand something important. What I ask is not for me. It is for everyone who might need help in the future, for the people who cannot speak for themselves, for those who might cry out in fear and find no one there." His voice carried both gentleness and quiet authority, and Elena felt a shiver run down her spine, not from cold, but from the seriousness of his words. Elena listened carefully, her heart still pounding from the storm and the adrenaline that had carried her through the dangerous moments. She had expected a simple thank you, maybe a request for money or a favor, but what Caleb was asking for was different. It was a promise that she would carry forward into her life. one that would shape her actions and her decisions. The weight of it made her hesitate. How could one promise change everything? Caleb's gaze softened as he noticed her hesitation. He knelt fully now, making eye contact with her, and spoke more quietly. I have seen what happens when no one acts. Years ago, my own sister was trapped in a storm, not unlike this one. She was alone, and no one came. I tried to reach her, but it was too late. I lost her that day. I carry that memory with me every day. Every time I hear someone cry for help, I remember her, and I know that I cannot ignore it. That is why I ask this of you. Will you promise me that you will never ignore someone's cry for help? Elena's breath caught in her throat. She could see the pain behind Caleb's eyes, the grief he had carried silently for so many years. She thought of her own children, safe now only because of his courage, and she realized the depth of what he was asking. This was not a request for something easy. This was a request for responsibility, for awareness, for action when it mattered most. She began, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can. It's a lot. Caleb nodded slowly. I know it is, but life has a way of testing us. Sometimes it asks for courage we didn't know we had, at times when it matters most. Today, I ask for that courage from you, not for me, for the people who may come after you, for those who may find themselves in danger, alone, and afraid. The rain had slowed almost to a stop, leaving only the soft patter of drops on the grass and leaves. A few small puddles reflected the gray sky above, and the air smelled of wet earth and grass. Elena looked at her children again. Their small faces were pale, still showing traces of fear, but also trust. They trusted her to keep them safe. And now Caleb was asking her to extend that trust beyond this moment, beyond even her family, to strangers she had never met. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her chest. It was not easy. Promises like this were heavy, not like a simple word of thanks. They were commitments that could change the way a person lived, the choices they made every day. But she also felt something else, a spark of understanding, a small flame of courage that had grown stronger because of Caleb's actions. He had acted when it mattered. She could do the same. I promise, she said softly, her voice steadying as she spoke. I promise that if I ever see someone in danger, I will do what I can to help, no matter how hard it is, no matter how inconvenient it may seem. Caleb nodded, a faint smile crossing his face, though it did not reach the depths of his eyes. There was still seriousness there, still the memory of what he had lost. But he felt a sense of relief, knowing that the promise had been made and that it might carry forward into the future. Elena felt a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and a strange heaviness that came with accepting responsibility. She understood that this promise was not just words, it was action. It would guide her choices, her instincts, her awareness of others. She would need to teach her children the same, to help them understand that life was not just about protecting themselves, but about caring for others in moments of need. For a while, they all sat quietly together. The storm had moved on, leaving only the soft drizzle and the scent of wet grass. The children, now calm, leaned against their mother, their eyes wide with curiosity and awe. They had witnessed something remarkable, someone risking everything for them, and now they were part of a lesson that would last a lifetime. Caleb stood slowly, brushing the mud and water from his clothes. He looked at the family, knowing that his work here was done for now. He had given them safety, and he had asked for a promise that might change their lives. But he also understood that a promise was only as good as the actions it inspired. He would have to trust them to carry it forward. Elena watched him, her mind still racing from the events of the past hour. She thought about the fear, the rush of the water, the sound of her children crying, and the overwhelming relief when Caleb had appeared. And now, she thought about the promise she had made. It was daunting, yes, but it also felt right. It was a way to honor the courage she had witnessed, a way to keep the memory of today alive in a meaningful way. "I'll keep it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I'll keep the promise for them, for everyone." Caleb nodded again, understanding the depth of her words. "Good," he said simply. "That's all I ask." As they began to move back toward the small dirt road that led to their home, Elena helped her children along the muddy ground. Each step was careful, each movement deliberate, but there was a new sense of purpose in her stride. She knew that life could change in a single moment, and that courage could take many forms. Sometimes it was running into a storm. Sometimes it was making a promise to act when it mattered most. The three of them walked together, the children still holding tightly to their mother, while Caleb walked a short distance behind them. He did not need to lead. They had their own path now, guided by the promise and the lesson of the storm. The wind had died down almost completely, and the rain had lessened to soft droplets that barely disturbed the ground. The sky, though gray, held a quiet beauty, the kind that comes after a storm passes. Elena looked at her children, imagining the kind of people they would grow up to be. She wanted them to understand courage, responsibility, and kindness. She wanted them to remember the man who had saved them and the lesson he had imparted. And she knew that the promise she had made would not just shape her life, it would shape theirs as well. Caleb, watching from a distance, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had acted when it mattered. He had saved lives, and he had inspired a promise that might ripple outward in ways he could never fully see. And while the storm had brought fear and danger, it had also brought clarity. It had reminded everyone involved that life was fragile, that courage was essential, and that one person's actions could make a difference beyond imagination. As the evening settled in, the family finally reached the edge of the town where the lights of houses flickered warmly against the gray sky. Elena looked back once, seeing Caleb's figure in the distance, standing quietly in the field, watching them. She felt gratitude, awe, and a deep respect for the man who had risked himself for them, and for the promise that now connected their lives in an invisible but powerful way. The memory of the storm, the rescue, and the promise would stay with her forever. It was more than a story of survival. It was a story of courage, responsibility, and the human capacity to act when it mattered most. And though the danger had passed, the lessons of that day would live on, guiding her actions and shaping the lives of those she loved. After the storm, life slowly returned to its normal rhythm in the small town. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the earth soaked and the air fresh and clean. Puddles reflected the soft light of the morning sun, and the fields glistened with drops of water on every blade of grass. Birds had returned, singing quietly in the trees, and neighbors began to step outside, assessing the minor damage that the storm had left behind. Life seemed calm, almost peaceful. But for Elena, nothing would ever be quite the same. She had kept her promise. The words Caleb had asked her to speak in the storm had stayed with her, quietly growing into a new awareness that shaped her every action. Each morning she thought about how fragile life could be, and how quickly things could change. She remembered the fear in her children's eyes, the roar of the water, and the calm determination in Caleb's expression as he carried them to safety. That memory became a quiet guide, reminding her that courage often meant stepping forward when others might hesitate. Elena began to make small changes in her life. She volunteered at the local community center, helping organize events for families in need. She learned basic first aid and emergency skills, attending workshops on how to help people during floods, fires, or accidents. It was not always easy. There were times when she was tired, when the demands of work and family weighed heavily on her shoulders. But she remembered Caleb's words, "No matter how hard it is, no matter how inconvenient, act when you can." Those words echoed in her mind, giving her strength when she felt like giving up. Her children, too, began to notice the changes in their mother. She spoke to them about courage, responsibility, and kindness, telling them the story of the storm and the cowboy who had saved them. She emphasized that helping others was not just about being brave in dangerous situations, but about being aware, caring, and willing to act in everyday life. The children listened closely, their eyes wide with wonder, and slowly began to understand that their mother's actions were shaping the values they would carry into the future. One crisp winter evening, several months after the storm, Elena noticed a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. It came from a small house at the edge of town, near the old oak trees. She could see the faint orange glow flickering against the dark sky, and her heart skipped a beat. People had begun to gather on the street, but most were standing at a safe distance, unsure what to do. Some whispered to each other, while others simply watched, frozen in uncertainty. Elena remembered the storm, the fear, and the promise she had made. She did not hesitate. Without a second thought, she called the emergency services, explaining the situation clearly and calmly. Then she ran toward the house, her children following close behind. She knocked on doors, alerting the neighbors and the family inside, urging them to leave immediately. Her voice was steady, confident, and filled with authority that came not from position, but from knowledge and courage. The elderly couple living in the house were slow to understand at first, confused by the sudden chaos. But Elena remained patient, gently guiding them outside, ensuring that they moved safely away from the smoke and flames. The neighbors followed her lead, moving quickly as the fire grew stronger. It was only minutes before the fire department arrived, but by then, everyone was out of immediate danger. Elena's heart pounded as she watched the firemen work, the flames crackling and smoke rising in thick clouds. She felt a mix of relief and pride. The situation could have ended tragically, but because she had acted, no one was harmed. Her children looked up at her, their small faces filled with awe and admiration. In that moment, they understood the true meaning of courage, not just bravery in the face of danger, but responsibility, awareness, and action when it mattered most. Later that night, as she tucked her children into bed, Elena reflected on the journey she had been through since the storm. She remembered the fear she had felt, the relief when Caleb arrived, and the weight of the promise she had made. It had been difficult at first, a heavy responsibility that felt almost too much to carry, but now she understood its importance. The promise had changed her, guiding her actions and shaping the kind of person she wanted to be. She thought of Caleb, the man who had risked his life to save hers and her children. She wondered if he knew the impact he had made, not just in the storm, but in the way his words had guided her actions. She realized that courage and kindness were contagious, that one act could ripple outward in ways that were impossible to predict. Caleb had saved their lives that day, but he had also inspired a promise that would save others in the future. The next morning, life continued in the small town as usual. Children played in the streets, neighbors chatted over fences, and the sun shone softly through the clouds. Elena went about her day with a quiet sense of purpose, her mind attentive to those around her. She helped a neighbor carry groceries, assisted a young mother whose child had fallen on the icy sidewalk, and checked on the elderly couple who had been saved from the fire. Each action, small though it might seem, was a reflection of the promise she had made during the storm. Caleb, meanwhile, returned to his ranch, tending to his horses and cattle as he had done countless times before. He had heard whispers about the small fire, and how a young mother had acted quickly to save her neighbors. He did not seek recognition, but a quiet satisfaction filled him. The promise he had asked for in the storm had been kept, and its effects were already visible. Life, he knew, was fragile, and courage and kindness were precious. He had witnessed both that day, and he could rest knowing that the lesson had been passed forward. As the weeks turned into months, Elena continued to act on her promise. She joined a local volunteer group focused on helping people during emergencies. She and her children participated in community events, teaching others about safety, awareness, and the importance of helping those in need. The lessons she learned from Caleb's actions became part of her daily life, shaping her choices and interactions in ways that extended far beyond the storm. One evening, as she walked home from the community center with her children, Elena looked out at the fields that stretched toward the horizon. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of grass and earth. She thought back to the day of the storm, the fear, the rising water, the desperate cries for help, and smiled quietly. The memory was still vivid, but it was no longer frightening. It was a reminder of what had been learned, a symbol of courage, action, and the importance of keeping promises. Her children walked beside her, holding her hands. They were beginning to understand the values she had embraced, the importance of noticing when someone was in need and acting without hesitation. She hoped that these lessons would stay with them for life, just as Caleb's actions had stayed with her. The world could be unpredictable, dangerous, and frightening, but it could also be full of kindness, bravery, and human connection. Years passed, and the story of the storm became a memory, a tale that Elena shared with her children as they grew older. She told them about Caleb, about the rescue, and about the promise that had changed her life. She emphasized that courage was not only for extraordinary moments, but for everyday actions as well. Helping someone, noticing someone in need, and acting when it mattered most. These were the true marks of bravery. Caleb continued his life quietly on his ranch, hearing occasionally about the small acts of courage inspired by his request. He never sought recognition, but the knowledge that his actions and words had sparked change brought a sense of peace. Life was not about the storms that came and went, but about how people responded when faced with challenges, and how one person's courage could inspire many. Elena often thought of that stormy day, not with fear, but with gratitude. It had been the beginning of something greater than herself. It had been a lesson in courage, responsibility, and the importance of keeping promises. And she knew that the promise she made to Caleb was more than just words. It was a guiding principle, a way to live, and a way to ensure that the cries of those in need would never go unheard. The small town continued to thrive, its fields golden in the sun, its streets filled with laughter and life. But beneath the surface, a quiet story of courage and promises lived on, carried forward by a woman who had learned to act when it mattered most, by a cowboy who had risked everything, and by the children who would grow up knowing the importance of kindness, responsibility, and bravery. Elena's life, shaped by that storm and the promise she had made, became a story of hope. One act of courage had led to another, creating a chain of kindness and bravery that extended far beyond a single day. The memory of the storm remained, but it was no longer frightening. It was a symbol of the difference one person could make, the ripple effect of action, and the lasting impact of keeping a promise that mattered. And so, life went on, peaceful yet purposeful. Elena, her children, and Caleb carried the lessons of that day forward, quietly changing the world around them through courage, kindness, and a simple promise that had grown into a lifetime of action. The cries that had once filled the stormy air had been answered, and their echoes lived on in the lives they touched. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope, and even the smallest act of courage can save lives.